Welcome back to another TrueNAS Tech Talk, our first of 2025. It's going to be an exciting year. So 24.10.1 came out and has been out over the holiday break. We've seen some record-breaking adoption. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to be covering a little bit in depth why TrueNAS doesn't swap and more. Stay tuned.
That sounds exciting. I know we made some changes to swap in recent versions, so I imagine our audience really wants to hear about the design decisions behind that.
This is one of those things where it comes up on the forums occasionally, and I like to geek out and talk about it because swap's been my nemesis for many, many years, maybe a decade now. But anyway, we'll get into that in just a second. So first, let's talk about the top news item here, which is the update on 24.10.1. As most of you probably know, that update was released shortly before the Christmas break. It's been just about 2 weeks now since the official launch, 2 weeks and some change. So within a week, it quickly became the #1 most installed and running version of TrueNAS in the wild, beating out all the previous scale versions, 13 versions, etc., which is pretty big. And over a holiday, too. So a lot of you guys must have had time to kill, do updates.
Yeah, maybe somebody got new systems, built a new one.
I actually have seen a few different things on Reddit, people showing their hardware piles that they're getting ready to assemble, which is fun. I do that about every 3-ish years myself, where I go and rebuild my TrueNAS, and frankly, I just enjoy building the hardware. So it's a fun distraction.
Absolutely.
But as of this morning, we just got an update. We're about in the 41,000 system range of people that have upgraded to 24.10.1, or I guess I should say systems in the wild.
Yeah.
The previous record for a .1 release was Dragonfish back in the spring, and that, by comparison, had about 25,000 systems at this point in its release cycle. So that's a huge bump compared to the previous record holder. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's pretty amazing. Hey, congratulations, everybody.
Yeah, no, and that's great. And of course, we're still keeping an eye on the forums and bug reports and all that. And honestly, it's been pretty smooth sailing. You know, the assortment of issues that people always hit at upgrade and messing around with their settings and apps and all that. But aside from that, there's nothing prompting us to go and do like a hotfix release or anything imminently. So again, smooth sailing, knock on wood. Hopefully it stays that way.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody jumping in there and sharing your experiences and your feedback with us. We really appreciate it. Just
Absolutely.
Like we said last time, if you do experience something you don't expect, please file those debug reports, send them in to us. We want your feedback.
Absolutely, because we do have the .2 release, which will be kind of the last major point release of the Electric Eel cycle. That work, I think, code freeze wraps up next week sometime. So it is pretty quick here. So again, if you have lingering issues or if there's anything that you're hitting problems with on the .1 release, make sure those bug reports get in ASAP so that we can address them and make sure they're taken care of in .2 if at all possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Or should I say absolutely now? Segue
here. Okay, nice segue there. So speaking of apps, so you want to take this one for us?
I'll take this one. So just because of my horrible segue there and dad joke, we've had a nice upswing in the number of community-derived apps getting opened as pull requests in our official apps repo, which of course is github.com/TrueNAS/apps. So please continue doing this. We are happy to review and assist wherever we can to ensure that all of these applications that you want to see in the community train start landing in a timely fashion. So anything that's out there as an existing Docker application that you think could benefit from just a little bit more, formatting and some tunes to make it applicable specifically to the TrueNAS installation and the, middleware and the UI we have going on, land that in there and we'll see if we can help sort of courier it in there. The more people that can use it with the simple 2-click installation or quick setups or some, even just guidance for something that's out there as a YAML, and you think, hey, maybe this would be just a couple quick tweaks and we can have it as a nice clickable app. We're happy to help with that.
Well, it is super nice to see other community folks starting to send in those pull requests too. It means we're doing something right. People are kind of figuring it out.
Absolutely. And I think we might need to update the main README for that repo. I think we still have that matrix up about showing parity between Electric Eel and Dragonfish. I think we can't really go much more over 100% for that because we finished that job a while ago. So it's probably time for us to do some updates and a little bit of post-holiday house cleaning on our own front there.
Yeah, I'll talk to the devs here internally. I think that's something we'll want to refresh. We did add a contributor's guide. There's a link on the main README there, which kind of walks through the developer instructions on how you create an app and test it locally and all that good stuff. So we'll probably try and make that a bit more prominent and more guidance on, getting started if you want to contribute. But we'll do that here, I'm sure, in the next few weeks.
Sweet.
Okay.
let's get into the big subject here. You said you
Uh,
wanted to geek out about swap
this
space. I mean,
this
it's
is my soapbox this week. let's
absolutely,
let's talk about swap.
climb on the soapbox. Let's go.
So we'll do a little bit of history just to bring some folks up to speed if you're not very familiar with swap or where it came from or what it does or how it works. But swap space as a concept has been around since the 1960s, like well before my time. This first debuted back in the Multics operating system. And I'm pretty sure most of us here have never touched a Multics in our life. I'm going to say we're a little too young for that. But the original purpose was being able to take the current running memory of a program and dump it to a solid, a disk drive, some sort of stateful device for later retrieval and continued processing. That was super important back in those days, especially because there was only one CPU and programs had to share time on it. They were slow, and memory to work with was super precious. We're talking measured back in bytes and kilobytes. If you've seen the old computing systems that were used to like launch space shuttles and not
Are we
the
talking?
shuttle.
Are we talking like vacuum tube era here, Chris?
Yes, we're really old school now, right?
All right.
So
Wow.
this is where swap first got its start as a concept, right? So it's been way back at the beginning of computing. But of course, it's modernized like many other things. So since the 90s, Linux and other OSs, of course, kept this kind of functionality. It still basically does more or less the same thing. It's a means to page out certain inactive portions of memory from a program that is still otherwise running, but maybe isn't actively processing something. So that memory is kept cold. And that means it's usually flushed to a hard drive. Of course, back in the 90s, could be an SSD today. But the point is, it's not in your fast RAM. There is a process that has to be moved out to the slower stateful devices. And then later on, when the program wakes up and says, hey, I want to start operating again, that has to be then relocated back into active memory to be functional. So high level, again, I'm really glossing over some things. If you want to get into the details of kernel and how it does all that, that's probably a different show and different level of audience.
I think that's a full presentation from your front there.
Yeah. I think what we'll do is we'll kind of leave it at that. But let's fast forward a little bit to the modern era. Okay. So today, modern TrueNAS systems. Of course, we have the luxury of having a lot, comparatively, of memory to play with compared to, the 60s, even the 90s. We're talking gigs and gigs and gigs, not measured in megabytes or kilobytes like most of us grew up with, right? So much so, we have this embarrassment of riches that we even use memory today as temporary cache space. It's not even all for just running programs and storing their state in active memory. We use it for things like the ZFS ARC, which is, for those who don't know, the adaptive replacement cache. That's basically your in-RAM cache of things that are being actively used from the file system. So we don't have to constantly go out to drives or SSDs to, get bits. If it's already in RAM, we can serve things from RAM. That's all great, right? So, however, on the TrueNAS side, and going back even to the FreeNAS days, we used to still have swap space enabled for a lot of legacy reasons. That was only ever done on our community builds of TrueNAS, aka not the TrueNAS enterprise products, where we always made sure we shipped systems with lots and lots of memory to spare. And, this seemed to be okay for many, many years. And then in recent years, we've seen just assortment of different issues come from community users who run into problems where they are using that swap. And this kind of came to a head, I think, in the early part of this last year, 2024. What would happen is we would get bug reports or people reporting stability issues. Oh, my system got really slow, or it became unstable, or some protocol or client thing didn't work right. But it looks like it's up and running. Certain things are working, but then I can't even SSH into the box. It's just really dog slow. And it was really tough to troubleshoot and see what was going on. So we had enough of these come in over time that I finally internally here, we had plenty of debate and argument about it. And I was just like, guys, it's time to remove swap entirely. We don't do it on enterprise. We shouldn't be doing it on community side either, because really what it's doing is it's just masking the issues. What was happening is in almost all these things where we could get the user to investigate the problem, you dig in and find out that swap's being fully utilized. Something has eaten up all the RAM. It's not being released. And unfortunately, on the community side, swap was being placed on the boot device, which meant now the main OS device that runs all the other things, your middleware processes, your various services, unless they were actively in memory and currently healthy, other stuff would just kind of slow down and stall out because it was just being starved for RAM, and swap was just so busy churning.
Yeah. And the key thing is that people like to think, it's swap. It'll just come back in when it needs. there's order of magnitude differences when you're talking about the speed of a hard drive to a solid state drive, and there's an even bigger kind of order of magnitude when you're talking about either of those compared to your main memory. We're
Oh,
talking about,
absolutely.
nanoseconds versus microseconds versus milliseconds. They all seem
Absolutely.
really, really fast to a human, but I think that we have a table that kind of tries to make analogies between computer time and human time. It's the difference between going to your kitchen to get some food and having to drive halfway across the country to go pick
Hmm.
up a pizza.
Absolutely.
That's kind of the difference between going to RAM for something and having to go to swap for something. So obviously, we wanted to keep as much into RAM as possible.
Well, and what we found was there was no one problem or one cause. Once you started hitting swap, different programs would break in different, interesting, and often undefined ways. Because again, everything is multi-threaded these days, and oh, this thread is expecting something to be available instantly. Oh, no, it's in swap and it took too long. Meanwhile, something else is locked up, waiting for that thread to come back for what it assumed was going to be a nearly instant operation. And this was across all kinds of things, different sharing protocols, file system things, Python, middleware, you name it. We were kind of seeing failures everywhere. And at the end of the day, they were all the same cause, if you were, which was swap was being fully utilized and it was just causing the system to break down in exotic fashion. But the most insidious thing was usually when that happened, you couldn't SSH into the box or get a console to go investigate. So end users were reporting, oh, my system became unstable or flaky or stalled or some thing stopped working, and then they would just reboot and it would magically all fix itself and come back for a while until they hit it again.
And of
Which
course, the challenge with that is if you can't get to the box, you can't gather a debug. You can't submit
can't
a
get a
bug report
debug,
for us.
right? It just makes it super hard to really troubleshoot what the real problem is here. So we made the call here internally, and I was heavily involved with this discussion because, again, this is my soapbox and something I had been fighting this for years, running build farms where swap was just the devil and caused all kinds of exotic failures. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, in TrueNAS, you should have enough memory, so much so that we can use it for ARC. Well, in a functioning system, you would never dip into swap ever. If the system's healthy and happy, we will always be releasing ARC back to whatever applications need additional memory as the pressure grows. And hopefully you've sized the system big enough to be able to handle that workload. My stance is once you hit swap, you've already failed. It's just the crash hasn't fully materialized. You've already gone off the track and the train hasn't just fully come to a stop yet.
Yeah,
Right?
you are right. You are riding the guardrails when you're hitting swap.
Absolutely.
I remember that being a pretty common refrain on the old forums was, people looking at why is my system slowing down or being unstable. A lot of the first times we'd say is, are you swapping? And it would be
Yep.
people who are, if they're running VMs back on the FreeNAS days, they were running VMs on top of it. They were running a bunch of jails, and we'd say, they're trying to do all this on the barest minimum of memory. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you might be asking a little bit too much. Give it some more RAM. Take the pressure off of it.
Yep. And 9 times out of 10, that solves everything. Life moves on. It's great. So I think I made the comment on the forums back when we were having some of this debate about I'd rather fail early and fail often because then at least I know what the cause is and I can address it. Right. And if you truly do have a system where you have, we'll say some culprits here. You said VMs. That's a good example. Somebody's just spun up too many VMs and they just don't actually have the hardware to support that many. Well, that's an easy thing to diagnose and solve. Yeah, run less VMs or throw another stick of memory or two in there, right? Same thing with apps. You could be running an app and it's just decided to consume a ton of memory well beyond what the system's capable of supporting. Okay, great. You can go stop that app. You can troubleshoot it. You can go and limit it in the software and say, no, you only get 4 gigs and no more. Wonderful. That's, again, easy to diagnose now because the defined behavior is when you run out of memory without swap, the out of memory killer is going to go and kill the offender, right? Who has gone
Yeah.
off the rails here. So that's very easy to troubleshoot. Oh, my app stopped all of a sudden. Yeah, you look and it was consuming, 64 gigs because it was doing something dumb or might have a bug, a legitimate bug. But
Or
either
maybe
way,
somebody just said, I'm going to try and load this, 70 billion parameter LLM module on my system with 32 gigs of RAM.
right?
That might end poorly for you.
Absolutely. And I'd much rather know it was that action, which is what broke the system or is broken, versus the system just gets flaky and unstable and kind of goes into limp mode for days. And you're sit there stuck figuring out who did it, what's the underlying cause, right? Because once you understand the cause, it's very easy to go and remediate. And that's what it's all about here is getting you back to 100% uptime and stability. And swap was just making that very difficult. So by eliminating that. And again, there could be legitimate bugs too. I think we even found a couple issues in legitimate services, NAS sharing services, that had a memory leak in certain conditions. Well, great. We can now diagnose that and get you a patch very quickly, as opposed to saying, here's some swap. You can limp another 24 hours in some kind of crippled state where it's not really functioning properly, or it'll kill it. And then we can get the notice, look at the bug report and say, wow, we found a memory leak. We should go address that for the community and for everyone's benefit. So since we have made that change, it was a little controversial at the time last year. It's, people have different opinions on it. It's one of those topics, kind of like ECC versus not ECC, where a lot of us just grew up like, well, you have to have this much swap based on how much memory you have. But on our side, since we made the decision to eliminate swap on the TrueNAS side, we've seen a whole host of problem reports just go away. Now, granted, not that there aren't people still hitting issues with running out of memory. They are. It's very easy to point the finger and say, oh, yeah, well, you spun up that VM, or, oh, yeah, you have, 32 apps running on an 8 gigabyte TrueNAS. What are you doing? It kind of took away a lot of the mystery of it now. So in many ways, those things don't even result in a bug report because it's easy to look at it and say, oh, I see what you're doing. You're holding it wrong. Here you go.
The classic iPhone answer.
That's right.
Yeah.
But anywho, so that is kind of the short version of the story. And since this keeps coming up on the forums, I figured it was worth, digging into a little bit deeper here on the podcast. And hopefully that was illuminating for some folks. And again, I'm sure the debate will rage on. There's people probably yelling at it now like, no, Chris, you're wrong. I want my swap back. Okay, fine. Again, I can listen to the arguments. But at the same time, I can just tell you the result has been nothing but a net positive since we made that change on the TrueNAS side here.
Yeah. And that's what we're after. Of course, we want to reduce the number of issues that the general user is experiencing. And when you do hit them, we want to be able to resolve it quickly.
Yeah. As part of the challenge of releasing something as an appliance is we have to try and make decisions that impact people positively for the widest amount of the community. When you have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of systems all running it, everybody's got slightly different use cases and configurations. We have to come up with sane and safe defaults. Now, granted, you could probably argue, yeah, but I can get this slightly better performance if you tune it this way or that. That's all great, and more power to you if you know what you're doing and want to go do those things. But at the end of the day, we have to pick what's best for the wider audience. So in this case, disabling swap was definitely the right call.
Absolutely. If you know what you're doing, by all means, lift the hood, start turning screws. But we wanted to make it a safe experience for those who didn't have that talent.
Absolutely. Okay. I think that was enough on swap said, but again, love comments. If you guys want to tell me I'm wrong, I'm happy to hear it. I've heard it all, I think, at this point, but feel free. Keep piling.
Absolutely. Feel free to start the discussion down in the comment section below. I mean, we'd be happy to jump in there ourselves when we have some time.
Yep.
Yeah. Or come over to the forums and, we'll probably have a big discussion going already by the time this video is up, I imagine.
It seems like it comes back up every 2 to 3 weeks. Somebody will mention it, but
every so often they say, hey, why did swap go away? Well, maybe we'll have somewhere we can point them back to now in your great discussion of the how and the why.
Absolutely. Excellent. Okay. Well, as we wrap up this week's show, we did want to put the call out, by the way. It's a new year. We got new topics. We're happy to dive into a bunch of new topics as well. Like I said, the swap thing was timely because I literally just read something about that recently. But we even had a good suggestion from a listener this last week about, hey, can you go and do a deeper dive on backups, like backups off the system? That's a really good idea. We should do that in an upcoming episode. So it might be the next one or the one after. Not sure. Just depends on what comes up next week, if there's something more pressing. But that's a really good topic.
Absolutely. Like we've said it before, we'll say it again. RAID is not a backup. Drive level redundancy is not a backup. You should always have backups of your most important data at the very least.
Absolutely. And of course, not all backups are equal too. There's file backups, there's backups to S3, there's ZFS replication, block-based backups. So yeah, we'll do a deeper dive on that down the road. So just to kind of whet your appetite, looking forward to having that discussion later. And the answer is do them all. There you go. I just spoiled it for you.
Absolutely. Do everything. And then, of course, we got our next version of TrueNAS, which is Fangtooth 2504. We hinted about that at the last episode where Chris did his demo of the Incus and the containerization and the new UI bit there. Lots of other exciting changes and new features coming in there. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about there in the next upcoming weeks as we lead into the beta that's hopefully going to be coming out in February of Fangtooth.
Hey, maybe by then I can show off the UI as well. There's a pull request open at the moment, adding that initial VM support for the Incus side. So coming soon.
Keep
an eye on the
better.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep an eye on that. Well, hey, thanks everybody for tuning in to our first episode of 2025 of the TrueNAS Tech Talk podcast. As always, you can submit your questions to t3@truenas.com via email. You can drop us a message in the comment section below if you just want to say hi. If you want to claim the first post, as that gentleman did on our last one. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to us so that you don't miss our next episode, and we'll see you next time.